It's the last weekend in June as I record this, and 3 days ago, for just the second time in my life, I attended a funeral. This was for my Aunt Ruth, my grandmother's younger sister who passed away at home at the age of 82. The previous funeral that I attended was for my great-grandmother Drum, Aunt Ruth's mother, as it turns out. She had passed away, and she was probably the single shortest adult I have ever known. I asked this past week about how tall she was, and person I just couldn't remember, but estimated about 4'7". It was always a big thing to be taller than her. She watched her children get taller than her. She watched her grandchildren get taller than her, and she watched her great grandchildren get taller than her. And when you're a kid and you're growing up, being as tall or taller than an adult is a really big thing. So it was something kind of everyone looked forward to, being taller than her and bragging about it a bit, and she took in good cheer. It was this fact of life. That was 1989, so if you're doing the math on that, that means I haven't attended a funeral in 27 years. A couple of wakes, but no funerals, and this is probably a stretch that unfortunately I'll never match again. Aunt Ruth had passed away at home. I understand she was in the kitchen and her son came in and her head was down on the table and she passed peacefully, which is a lot of worse ways to go than passing peacefully at home surrounded by family. So we had the wake on Tuesday and saw a number of family members that I haven't seen in probably 20 years. People who live a bit further away, who used to come to the family gatherings but don't anymore, and it's a shame that these are really the only sorts of events that sometimes you see these people. They don't come in for other things, but a funeral, there's, you have to show up, pay your respects. Just sometimes wish you could see these people more often. But the wake is not the worst part. I mean, you meet people again, you socialize a little bit, you reminisce and tell stories, but the next day with a funeral, that's always harder. I showed up, it was like 9 a.m. We were sitting there, and I remember just sitting in the chair and my tissues, because of course I'm crying a bit, and I'm trying not to look up at the front of the room. I don't want to look at the casket because when I'm looking at her, it's real. And when I'm looking down, I can pretend it's not. Denial is a very powerful force. At one point, I actually found myself wanting to, just briefly, but just for a moment, I had the urge to go up and say, stop pretending, this isn't funny anymore. You know, it's the sort of thought that occurs to you, it's ridiculous, but the denial was there. So that had passed, and I'm sitting there and I'm trying not to look, and her son Vince, who was coordinating a lot of stuff with the funeral, came up and he asked if I wanted to be a pallbearer. Said he wanted to offer it to family, to cousins, before going a little further out with that. And I had not even considered this was an option, and yeah, for it caught me rather by surprise. I ended up declining, and I mean, maybe because I was just caught by surprise and wasn't prepared to, and that's part of it. And part of it could be that my hernia's been aggravated, and any sort of activity like that could potentially be problematic. And there's some truth in that too. But the real reason, deep down, why I didn't do it is that I didn't think I'd earned it. I'd always thought that being a pallbearer was something that tended to be reserved for people who are closer to the deceased, who had a close relationship or had a huge impact on a person's life, somebody who was very influential to them. And that wasn't me. Aunt Ruth was somebody who I would only see 2 or 3 times a year at the family gatherings, and never really saw her too much outside of that or in other contexts. And agreeing to be a pallbearer at that point, at least in my head, that would be claiming a level of importance, a level of relevance and influence in her life that I hadn't earned, didn't deserve. It would have felt like misrepresenting myself. So I'm glad to have been asked. Don't get me wrong. I appreciate that he thought of me and the other relatives first, and probably the right way to go about it. But I declined, and I really think that was the right choice. I would have felt like a fraud saying yes, whether that's reasonable or not. That's the feeling I have about it. So, they got other people and six pallbearers, and we left the funeral home and went to the church where there was a service, the massive Christian burial. Excuse me. I was not especially enamored with that, because when Great Grandma Drum had passed away, the service was about her, and when Aunt Ruth passed away, the service really was more about Jesus. Um, when my great grandmother Drum had passed away, and the Pastor Heinzelman was talking, and he talked about obviously the religious aspect and going to heaven and so on, but he also talked about her. He told a couple of stories, mentioned one time when they were going back and forth, and she had said something, sort of a good-natured jibe, and he reminded her of something in her past, and she said to him, "Oh, you'll never let me forget that." And he said it, and he threw his hands like she would have, and he even got the cadence right. It was just, and everybody in there started laughing because we could all picture, we could all hear it in our heads, even though we weren't there. It was clear as day. That was a service that was about her. It was customized to her, talked about her, and I really appreciated that. The service for Aunt Ruth was the script, and the only time she was mentioned was when there was a blanket and it says deceased name here. It wasn't about her. Great Grandma Drum's service talked about her. It was a celebration of life. It was about her. The service for Aunt Ruth could have been for anyone, and that bothered me. I won't lie. I spent most of the service waiting for them to say something about her, and they never did. Now, maybe the idea behind that is that there's a sort of a normalcy or a familiarity to it. If you go through essentially a script and it's the same one for everyone, people there can get the sense of routine back. When you lose somebody, it's a routine. If they're routinely there and they pass away, they're not going to be anymore. But this, maybe it resets. It sort of sets the feeling that things will still continue, that the familiar will still be there, and that life will go on. And there's something to that. But from where I'm sitting, I don't see how you celebrate somebody's life when you don't talk about their life at all. So I found that profoundly disappointing. Perhaps it's the standard, perhaps it's what she wanted, and that's fine. I was not real enamored with it. I thought that it was very generic, and it was very superficial, and it wasn't about her. But it was what it was, and after the service, we left the church and we went to the cemetery. We didn't actually go to the gravesite, which was probably a good thing, because some of the family members are getting up there. My grandmother is 90, and Aunt Mary and Uncle Don have been married for like 60 years, which blows me away every time I think about it. We should all be so lucky. And it's getting into summer, hotter and humid, and Vince had talked about a funeral in his past where they were out at the gravesite, and one of the older uncles actually collapsed and died at the funeral, which, certainly some irony there. It's, not really funny in context, but the idea was that it probably wasn't a good idea to have everybody out there and standing in the sun and so on, which I agree with. And so we had a final service in the small building that is used more for when it's raining or when it's the middle of winter and you can't really be out there. Uh, Said our final goodbyes, and they thanked us for coming, and they thanked the person who did the services for honoring the mass, but not for honoring Aunt Ruth. And then we went and we got a meal afterwards at a reception hall, and family went our separate ways at that point. We didn't talk about her a whole lot, at least not at our table, and not during the day of the funeral when we were talking. I think we were all dealing with our losses in our own way. But I had told this story to a couple of people, probably my earliest memory of Aunt Ruth, or one of them. I couldn't have been older than 8 or maybe 9 years old at best. And I was in her car. We went back to my grandmother's house, and I don't remember why. Most likely we spent the day at Angela Park, which is a small amusement park in the area that went under like 20, 30 years ago. But we were back at my grandmother's house, and she was driving. I was in the back passenger seat. There were other people in the car. But this was the first car that I had ever been in that had power windows. And when you're like 8 years old, that is one of the most fascinating, incredible things in the world. I know that now everything has power windows. You put somebody in a car with windows that you can crank down, and they'll die of starvation before they figure out how to get out. But at the time, they weren't so ubiquitous. They were installed on bicycles like they probably are now. So I wasn't bothering it when we were driving. I think I've been asked about it. But when we got to the house and, we're not moving anymore, and I reached over and I started playing with it, and the windows going up and down and up and down. And part of what fascinated me was that there was like a little bit of a lag when I would push it. It wouldn't respond immediately. It would take a moment. And it wasn't responding. If I flicked it real quick up and down, if I was going down, just quick up and then back down, it wouldn't respond to that. And I couldn't quite figure it out. Turns out, as she told me a couple minutes later, the switch for the power window on that seat didn't work. Once we were parked, Aunt Ruth was turned around and looking at me and smiling, and she could see my hand on the switch, and she was holding the one on the driver's side, putting it up and down, trying to match it up as best she could with what I was doing. And there was no reason that she had to do that. She just did it to make me happy, and see a child smile. I mean, what could be better than that? That's the memory of her that kept circling around. And I told my grandmother about it, and I told my Aunt Mary, who is one of Aunt Ruth's sisters, and my Aunt Mary hugged me and thanked me for sharing that story. Something probably never knew happened. But that's probably one of the clearest memories I have of her. I remember the last time I saw her before the funeral was at one of the family gatherings last summer. I don't know, Labor Day, 4th of July, I don't know which one. And she was sitting there, and she had her oxygen tank that she was on 24/7, and we didn't really talk much. It was one of those things where you say hi to everyone, you show up, and you talk to a couple people, and you sort of spend time. You don't get to everyone, and then when you leave, you say goodbye to everyone. And it was really just something simple like that. I said my goodbyes, and she stood up and we hugged, and said I'll see you next time, and she said yeah, and went my way and didn't really think about it after that. Last time I ever saw her, there's always the next time. You always see next time. Always the next time until the inevitable one time that there isn't. And even when it's close and you prepare yourself for it, you still never see it coming, and you're never ready for it. I got to spend some time with my great-grandmother Drum before she passed away. I was spending a week at my grandmother's house, and she was there. People she normally stayed with were traveling, and she wasn't going with them, so she spent a couple of days while I was there, and we talked a little bit, and she was knitting like Afghans, and she was telling stories, and I was just listening, and I didn't say a whole lot, more listened, and was really glad to have that opportunity to have that chance to know her a little bit, and I never had that opportunity with Aunt Ruth, or if I did, it blew right past me without me noticing it. But you know, you have that meal at the end after the funeral, and it helps to remind us that family is important. You spend time with people you haven't seen, with relatives you haven't seen, and you sort of commiserate over your loss a little bit, and you remember the importance of family, and you leave remembering that, and it sticks in your mind, and until we forget again, until the next funeral, and so it goes, and so it goes. Goodbye, Aunt Ruth. I'll miss you. Rest in peace.